Hey, thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Tipper O'Brien. I'm joined by Mike Jones, our VP of Product Development here at US Cloud. Today, we're going to spend a few minutes helping you to compare Microsoft Unified and third-party support. We got about 10 slides to run through today. Should be an educational opportunity, but the goal really here is to compare that newer service of Microsoft Unified to what's available on the third-party market. And it seems like people tend to know about other services that exist in third-party software support, for example, Origina for IBM, but Microsoft is a little bit less clear. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that it's still a relatively new market, but it does seem to be more and more necessary given two things. One, the price hikes that folks are seeing from Microsoft, and then two, the increasing time to resolution issues caused frequently by lack of support or access to engineers and Microsoft's all too frequent layoffs, which another one happened this week as we were working on building out this presentation. So they just seem to be becoming more and more frequent. If you need a concrete takeaway to take and distribute throughout your company, we do have a cheat sheet available, which is essentially just a one-sheeter that is reflective of this webinar, available at uscloud.com. Or if you're looking for an analyst report, Gartner does have a market guide on third-party Microsoft support that you can find through your relationship with Gartner, or you can reach out directly to us and we'll provide that to you directly. So the different topics that we'll talk about today, we'll talk about why the market exists, the move from Premier, which you may be more familiar with, to Unified. We'll talk about time to resolution. So how is Microsoft communicating that? And then what is actual reality? And then who's covering those actual support tickets? We'll talk about some of the fear mongering that's going on that Microsoft Unified Sales is pushing about access to backend and tenant if you do go with a third party. We'll talk about if you stay with Microsoft Unified, some of the things that you should know about the proactive services that they communicate you're having access to, what are the best practices that you can follow to ensure that you actually do have access to those. We'll talk about data security, which this is really important. This is something that we hear from a lot of our customers. But ensuring that your entire company is aware of what is happening with your company's information. And then lastly, we'll dive a little bit deeper on pricing models and sort of distill the key differences, again, from that move from Premier over to Unified. So let's get this thing started. First thing, Mike, help us understand the new model, that move over from Premier to Unified. And obviously, there are a lot of people that are experiencing that for the first time. Talk a little bit about why that move was made and sort of what the impact of that has been.
Sure. So essentially, Microsoft back in 2017 came up with an initiative called Project Volta. And Project Volta initially was the next evolution of their support structure, which essentially moved to an unlimited kind of all you can eat from a support perspective model. Essentially what it did is it shifted away from the Premier Classic model, which was more of a needs-based model based on essentially a T&M model, where it's a consumption-based model, and you have a bucket of hours, if you will, in reactive, proactive, and service delivery time or TAM time. And then you could essentially utilize those different buckets throughout the length of your contract, if it's a 12-month typically or a multi-year contract. Instead, what they did is they shifted to a model that's basically based upon your licensing, consumption, and spend. So it moves from more of a needs-based model on what do I need for support over to more of a price-based support model based on just what you purchase. So it has nothing to do with the depth of technology that you may have or the expertise you may have to support those environments. It's strictly based right off the top on a percentage of the spend.
Got it. Well, one of the complaints, as you can see in this screenshot here from Gartner's report, is that there were difficulties with the higher cost of Unified, But
Right.
another all too
Hmm.
frequent complaint is the cratering time to resolution. Talk a little bit about how Microsoft is communicating time to resolution in the sales process, and then more about the reality of what folks are seeing.
Yeah, so essentially, outside of price, right, which the pricing model, customers are seeing 2, 3x, 4x, even sometimes I've seen 5x for customers in making the switch from Premier over to Unified. But outside of that, it's more of a quality play too. It's not just about the cost, which is astronomical for customers making the move over from Premier to Unified, but they're also seeing, customers that are already in Unified that have already made the switch are seeing year over year increases based on this, because again, it's based on your commitment of your licensing spend, not your actual need for support. Now, on top of that, what we've been seeing and customers have been talking about is more about the quality play. Why is Microsoft support starting to degrade in that space versus actually go up since the move to Unified? Well, if you look at an unlimited model, the low-hanging fruit is now I can call for any and all support cases that normally I would hold on to a little bit longer when I have more of a Premier or a needs-based model that's an hourly rate, right? So not only do you see a volume influx over the last couple of years in just true support, but on top of that, due to COVID, due to the economy, right, things like that, Microsoft's been laying off divisions within their support capability. So what do I do when I have less headcount and more volume? Well, my quality starts to go down. And time to resolution is a very indicating factor on those metrics, right? Now, essentially, what you're seeing is longer queue lengths. So not only is it taking me longer to get in, it's longer to get an engineer that's actually assigned. And then from that standpoint, getting that callback and follow-up from those engineers is taking an astronomical amount of time. So what we're seeing that just continue to increase month over month, year over year for customers. And it's not a solution that a lot of customers see adequate for their business critical or production environment.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So one of the things that we tend to hear is because there's some competition issues with third party coming in, the sales team is doing a little bit of fear mongering. And one of the things that tends to come up is, hey, if you go with this third party, you're going to have no direct link to us. Can you talk a little bit about that statement?
Yeah, my greatest topic and my most fun topic to talk about, the Microsoft FUD. So yeah, essentially with new players coming in, right? This is a really trailblazing experience that US Cloud was kind of one of the pioneers in this space as far as competing, if you will, and giving customers an alternative option. There really wasn't an alternative option before. And what we see is Microsoft kind of coming in with certain sales individuals. It's very regionalized and it's not widespread by any means. But what we see is customers come back to us and say, well, Microsoft says that a third party can't escalate to us, to Microsoft, that being, or they don't have access to any of the resources on the back end, and thereby you're kind of putting yourself on an island. Well, it's simply not true, right? So essentially what we do is, a Microsoft partner has what's called a Premier Support for Partners agreement. And that agreement essentially allows us to pass through support hours from us or in our partners on behalf of the customer. So essentially what the customer becomes is our customer through that contract to Microsoft. So the ability to escalate to them is very important, right? And we understand that. And we have a mechanism and a capability to continue to escalate on behalf of our customers for those things that do require that back-end escalation. That could be a cloud-related tenant issue. It could be a code issue, could be a bug fix that needs to go to the product teams. We have access and capabilities to do all of that for our customers. Essentially what you're working with majority of the time, and I would say upwards of 90%, is you're dealing with Microsoft VDash, right? You're dealing with consultants. You're dealing with non-badged non-Microsoft employee consultants, right? They are essentially contractors within the Unified Service Agreement. They're an outside firm that's providing that level of support, not directly tied to the back end of Microsoft either. So essentially, Microsoft started the third-party model long before US Cloud did. They were doing it with their reactive support on the Premier side, and then even more so now that Unified's come into play.
Okay. So I see we've got this bullet here about US Cloud solving 85% of tickets in-house. So we know that largely there's a better experience, especially when it comes to break fix. Talk a little bit about the proactive services that Microsoft provides, and then what their customers need to be aware of about how they actually need to act to get those proactive services.
Yeah, so a lot of the, it goes back early, to touch on really lightly, the negotiation of the Unified Support Agreement itself. So essentially, proactive services are an add-on capability. They are not part of the Unified Support Base Agreement. Essentially, you have to purchase as an add-on additional hours, and they call them flex credits now, where you can essentially purchase proactive hours on your contract for services that Microsoft delivers. Those services can vary, right? It can be envisioning health checks, workshops, if you will, all the way through any type of implementation using their MCS or Premier services around that. And essentially there's significant lead times is what we're seeing on the delivery mechanism that Microsoft has to their customer base. So just purchasing those hours doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a delivery within a reasonable time frame. So we're seeing that going really through the roof. 6-7 month lead times on projects is really unreasonable for a customer to accept. So not only do you have to negotiate it with Microsoft on the front end, you also have challenges post negotiation and contract with the delivery of the services itself. Whereas, our methodology is very simple. We're following a pseudo Premier Classic model where essentially we're making it even less complicated by making it one bucket of hours. So not only can you use your hours towards reactive services and break fix, we also provide proactive services similar to Microsoft. So we provide those assessments, those health checks, those implementations and migrations as well, but they're a part of your individual silo or bucket of hours. So you can spend those however you see fit.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like that potentially removes a lot of friction in that process.
We want to make it as simple as possible, correct?
Yeah, that's nice. That's not Microsoft's way, so it's nice that somebody's doing it. So you talked earlier about security issues, specifically as it applies to some of the VDASH folks. Talk about how Microsoft handles customer security.
Yeah, so here's the greatest unknown misconception. Microsoft essentially is not abiding by its least privileged access, best security practice protocols when it comes to support. Essentially, there is overlays of security for compliance for partners to abide by, right? It's very well known. It's out there on TechNet and Microsoft Learning. So it's out there and it's publicized. So essentially, there's a methodology of least or zero trust methodology or least privileged access. And essentially what you want to do is you want to give the bare amount of access rights to the customer environment in order to do the job you need to do. And when it comes specifically to support, there are very compliant from a security and risk mitigation standpoint. There are roles that you can assign to the partner that are very minimal. As an example, there's a role called service support admin. And essentially what that does is allow you the ability to submit support requests on behalf of the customer. And that's it, right? So that's the security compliance that US Cloud is following. What we see from customers is essentially when you call into Unified, there's no validation of any security layer. There's no GDAP or granular delegated admin privileges that you need to establish like you do with a third party or a partner. Microsoft's just going right in and doing what they need to do on your tenant. Now, great, except for the fact that if you remember earlier, I said 90% of their support is outsourced. So these are, not only are they offshore, they're outside Microsoft consultants that are accessing data on the back end and accessing information on the back end without any type of security, compliance, or risk mitigation. So I always encourage customers to really dig into that and educate themselves a little bit more about how that support structure works, right? It's great if you get Microsoft on the back end, an actual badged Microsoft employee, but there's still no security protocol or security layer to really mitigate risk on the customer's end. And that is something that needs to absolutely happen, and does with third parties like US Cloud. We establish that GDAP connection with our customers and provide that minimal layer of security needed in order to submit those support escalation requests to Microsoft.
Yeah, that's scary. That seems like that could be something that would keep me up at night.
It's certainly concerning.
Yeah, like worst case scenario could be real bad. Okay, last slide here. Let's talk just a little bit about pricing. Maybe touch on that shift over from Premier to Unified, the all-you-can-eat model, and tell us a little bit about what that has been like, not just in theory, but in application.
Sure. So essentially, what ends up happening for customers is, you're used to that needs-based model where essentially I need 500 hours of support, 1,000 hours of support a year. They're split up into those three siloed buckets of reactive, proactive, and service delivery, or TAM time. And then you go about your business. Well, essentially with the move to Unified, you have to think about how Microsoft is doing this. It's based on a percentage of your licensing spend and commit. So essentially there's a formula and a model based on your cloud spend, right? So Azure, Office 365, Dynamics 365 licensing purchasing. There is a server component of server licensing that you do, and then there's essentially a user licensing model. So these three factors come together, and essentially the percentages of what you purchase on your EA agreement dictate what your support cost is going to be. Not your support need, your support cost is based on licensing. So right off the top, there's a model where it doesn't give customers any level of choice. Yeah, it's an all-you-can-eat unlimited model, great, but you're going to pay 5x what you were before, and it's just not convenient or acceptable in my mind to the customer base. So essentially, there's a pricing model, and Microsoft has all these different buckets, right? So there's essentially a advanced, a core, and a performance unified support plan, and each one of those has add-on factors to the base level support. And again, to go back, those enhanced services and add-ons is pretty much every nice feature that you would want to have in Microsoft support. It's almost necessary to have those in order just for the support to be adequate, if you will. So essentially on the pricing model, our methodology is let's not make it complex. It's not based on what you purchase from a licensing standpoint. It is truly a needs-based model. We model it off of the old Premier Classic, except, the difference that I said before is instead of you having to estimate reactive, proactive, we do it all in one bucket. Essentially, that's a T&M model where you pre-purchase your hours in advance, and then you can use them throughout the support year. We allow you to add on additional hours without the stiff penalties and fees that Microsoft used to charge back in the day. So again, it's more user friendly, and we're trying to make a model that's very simple, a better quality of service at a cheaper price point, but also give customers a choice in this marketplace, which really has never existed in the Microsoft support landscape up until, just a few years ago. So, we want to create that choice in this model for customers that are not just looking at cost, because that's obvious in this approach, but also a quality play, right? We want to be faster to respond, faster to engage, and ultimately faster to resolve those issues in addition to being a cheaper play and a more affordable price for a customer.
Yeah, best of both worlds, better price, faster service. If you do work within IT procurement. There's a lot to unpack, obviously, when it comes to the pricing model and evaluating the services that you're getting. We have much more what I would describe as actionable information, worksheets on our site that we'd be happy to provide you with. And just as another talking point, in that negotiation, 90% of people who just simply have a quote from US Cloud, which is going to be less than your quote, obviously, from Unify. If you just go into your resub with that quote, 90% of people see a reduced quote from Microsoft. So even if you decide not to go with us, you're going to do better just by getting a quote. So that's all the time that we have today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you do have questions, please shoot us an email, questions@uscloud.com, or go onto our website. As I mentioned earlier, you can access the Gartner analyst report there, as well as the total cheat sheet from this webinar. Mike, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Take care, everybody.